الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Before we start, inshallah ta'ala, since this is majlis of where the Quran and the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ would be mentioned, it's not an obligation for anyone to stay. The obligation is for Salatul Jumu'ah. But if we stay, then inshallah ta'ala we need to observe the etiquettes in being in the masjid and listening attentively and seeking help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless our gatherings. These types of gatherings, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered us to observe, and this is the way of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, that the Sahaba radiallahu anhum would come to the masjid and the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam would teach them the religion. And this is how we received the wahy, the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And therefore this is something that we need to make sure that we're consistent in coming to the houses of Allah to learn the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. The subject, as we heard, is some of the rulings with regards to adhering to the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And this will be brief, inshaAllah ta'ala, but the way that it's going to go, inshaAllah, is that adherence to the Quran and the Sunnah, or you can say in Arabic, al-i'tisam bil-kitabi wa sunnah, to hold fast to the book, to the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. This is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordered us. And Sahaba radiallahu anhum, when they received this from the Prophet ﷺ, their life was about holding fast and adhering to the wahy, to the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And that al-Islam is istislam lillahi tabaraka wa ta'ala. These are all foundations. That is consensus. We all agree upon this. Al-Islam is to submit oneself willingly to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. To Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and when we say to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, since the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, he only conveys what Allah reveals to him. So the submission to the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, and the word al-istislam, and therefore al-i'tisam, submission and holding fast to the wahy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That means a person has to already been well established in his heart that this is not going to be filtered out with one's reason, liking, this and that. It's submission. So the objective is to know, and then a person has nothing but to submit himself with perfect love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and being pleased with the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because it's from Allah, the creator of the heavens and the earth. And when the Prophet ﷺ called the people to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, قُلْ هَذِي سَبِيلِ أَدْعُو إِلَى اللَّهِ, he did not call them to his own self or to anyone, but he called the people to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And for many years, the ayat of the Quran revealed to the Prophet ﷺ talks about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the entire Quran from the beginning to the end talks about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is a duty that we need to learn, because the more the person gets to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the more he would be at ease in that state of submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in all matters, in all of our affairs. So there's many different rulings that is related to this. But I would like first, inshallah ta'ala, to go through a hadith that is reported by Imam Malik in his Muwatta, hadith of Anas radiallahu anhu, and it's an authentic hadith. And then after that we'll get an example, or some of the examples of how the people of knowledge, they mention the subject. And there might not be stories in the session, and it's going to be brief, inshallah ta'ala. Definitely stories are important, because they are jund from junud of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It has its effect, of course, and we have that in the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. But this hadith of Anas radiallahu anhu, that the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, he said, إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَرْضَ لَكُمْ ثَلَاثًا وَيَكْرَهُ لَكُمْ ثَلَاثًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased for three things to be for you. Three things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased for you to be upon. Three things for you to be upon. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with you to be upon these three matters. وَيَكْرَهُ لَكُمْ ثَلَاثًا. And He hates and dislikes for you to be upon other three things. So the first three things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased, in Allah yarda. And this is one of the attributes of Allah, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with those who are obedient to Him, those who submit themselves to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. And al-rida from Allah, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with someone, then there is no need for that person to worry whatsoever. What keeps us away from having the ultimate joy in this life is that the matter is unseen to us. If someone knows in this life that Allah is pleased with him, would it matter anything in this life for that individual? The answer is no. That's why, as always mentioned, the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, there was no like of them afterwards, because they received that in their lifetime, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with them. Radiallahu anhum wa radu an. So that level that they reached, in which they lived their life knowing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with them, that made them excel in all acts of worship, one of which is the fear of Allah. Opposite to those who have ignorance, they would think that they relax the matter. No, they were the best of this ummah in actions, in speech, in matters of belief, in the fear of Allah, hope for the rewards from Allah, and so on. But the fact that this was something given to them, that anything in this life didn't really matter. Why? Because if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with someone, why would that person cares about anything else? And that means that if a person departs from this life, and this is what everybody, it's going to happen to everyone, death is the one thing that everybody knows and believes in. When they return to the mercy of Allah and to the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's the best thing, and that nothing is like of it. So here, three things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased for you to be upon. And opposite to that, the three things Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hates for you to be upon. So therefore the submission has to be there. The first three, or the ones that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with, أَن تَعْبُدُوهُ. The Prophet ﷺ said, أَن تَعْبُدُوهُ وَلَا تُشْرِكُوا بِهِ شَيْئًا. That you worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and you don't associate partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's, of course, the foundation of all the religion, the foundation of every messenger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was sent with. And as you see how the way of the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ that talks about this subject, أن تعبدوه ولا تشركوا به شيئا. It is not sufficient to say أن تعبدوه, that you worship Him, unless you add to it ولا تشركوا به شيئا, and that you don't associate partners with Allah whatsoever. شيئا, the smallest and the major things. And this is the subject of the Tawheed versus Shirk, where if you hear someone belittling the subject, your duty is to flee away from such a person. Because the entire deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is about at-Tawheed and warning against Shirk. And it's not something in the past and it's over with. It's a continuous thing. Even if a person reaches the highest level of al-Iman, he needs to continuously be upon the Tawheed, and he needs to continuously be warned against Shirk, then he warns himself. And therefore we have to learn at-Tawheed to be upon it, and we have to learn a-Shirk to avoid it. And this is how the message of the Quran. When we say al-i'tisam, or to hold fast to the deen of Allah, it's not the religion of al-Islam that people invented. It's not what people might think or feel it is. It's nothing but al-athar, the wahy revelation from Allah, which is basically al-Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And this is in any gatherings, whether it's khutbatul Jumu'ah, durus, lectures, whatever we do, it has to be al-Quran wa Sunnah. This is how we are supposed to be upon. Not from the common person to get and delve in it from his own like this with ignorance, but this is the job of the people of knowledge, where they learned it and then they teach it to others. And even the interpretation and the ahkam and so on, it's to give the people the rulings, but it's based on the Quran and the Sunnah, and to always refer to the people of knowledge in this subject. So this is the way of the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, because without that, there is no deeds would be valid whatsoever. So أن تعبدوه, that you worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone with perfect love, with perfect submission, that He's the only one worthy of worship subhanahu wa ta'ala, to have ikhlas al-ibadah lillah, to sincerely turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with worship. You make sujood only to Allah, you slaughter only to Allah, your life, your death is only to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, your dua is only to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, no dua is to be done to anyone but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Every ibadah is to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. وَلَا تُشْرِكُوا بِهِ شَيْئًا. You do not associate partners with Allah, invoking other than Allah, turning to other than Allah, with the details of what a shirk is. And if you did not till now learn these two things, and it's a very simple matter, then we have to take the time to learn it because it's an obligatory knowledge. The second thing, so أن تعبدوه, and we should inshallah memorize these 6 points. It's very easy inshallah. أن تعبدوه ولا تشركوا به شيئا. The second one is وأن تعتصموا بحبل الله جميعا. وأن تعتصموا بحبل الله جميعا, that you تعتصموا. This is the verb of al-i'tisam. This is the verb of adhering, and that you adhere and you hold fast to the rope of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All of you, to adhere to it. And this is, as we know from the Quran, وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبِلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا. وَاعْتَصِمُوا, al-i'tisam comes from al-isma, is when you're holding something that would protect you from harm. So holding fast to something, this is al-i'tisam. And a person is in state of protection when he's like this. So he's holding fast to something that if he let go, he will be perished. He will be destroyed. This is what al-i'tisam comes from. So it's not just holding loose or with a rope that is loose. No, holding fast to it very strongly. And all of you, and do not disperse. وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا. Do not be disunited when it comes to this. And that's why, as mentioned before, it came in the Quran in two meanings. وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبِلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا, and it came also وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِاللَّهِ هُوَ مَوْلَاكُمْ فَنِعْمَ الْمَوْلَى وَنِعْمَ النَّصِيرُ. اعْتَصِمُوا بِاللَّهِ, hold fast to, adhere to, billah, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the other one, اعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبِلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا, which is mentioned in the hadith. Al-habl is the rope. And the rope of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as mentioned in this ayah, as Ibn Abbas said and others, it's the deen of Islam. It's the Quran. Is the ahkam, is this entire deen, is the Quran, is the Sunnah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. This is what you're commanded to hold fast to it. And the words that is in the wahy is not like the words of the human beings when they make up something. You know, it's something that beyond the capacity of the human beings. That means it's meant to be the way that it's being said. And there's no word that can be better than this word to describe that act of worship or that concern that a person should have, and what does it mean. So وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبِلِ اللَّهِ, this is the level of adhering to the deen of Islam, to the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. And as if you hear the hadith of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, عَلَيْكُمْ بِسُنَّتِي وَسُنَّةِ الْخُلَفَاءِ الرَّاشِدِينَ الْمَهْدِينَ مِنْ بَعْدِي عَضُّوا عَلَيْهَا بِالنَّوَاجِذِ, bite on it with your molar teeth. That means you're not going to be left alone. So prepare yourself that you have to struggle, that you have to put effort to make sure that you don't go beyond the wahy from Allah, the rope of Allah, the deen of Allah. وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبِلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا. وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِاللَّهِ, al-i'tisam billah is at-tawakkul ala Allah. This is the other, without the habl of Allah, which is mentioned in the Quran, that means you rely upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Adhering to Allah, what does that mean? To seek the protection from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. Not to let go whatsoever. He's the one that you rely upon. He's the one that you fear. He's the one that you hope. He's the one that you're pleased with. He's the one that your ibadah, your everything is by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you're only witnessing the actions and the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. هو مولاكم. He's the one that supports you and helps you. فنعم المولى ونعم النصير. So the second thing is وأن تعتصموا بحبل الله, that you hold fast to the rope of Allah, to the deen of Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with you. If that simple statement as it's mentioned like this, before we get to know the details of the deen, right? And if someone, say for example, just embrace Islam now, and he hear that word, it has to be well established in his heart. And if he does, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with him. It means you hold fast to the rope of Allah, to the deen of Allah. And to hold fast to it, that means what? It's not going to be again anything else. It's not going to be the desires. It's not going to be this or that. And therefore, in any way that a person is upon, whether it's you're traveling in this life, this entire world that we live in, you need two things. You need to be guided to the path that you're going to a journey. So you need to know your path first. And you need to be safe while you're going onto this path. Right? So this is basically to give us an idea of the differences between both. وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِاللَّهِ وَاعْتَصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ. You need to know the path. This is the rope of Allah. If this is what you want to go somewhere, well, there's only one way to it, which is the truth. The Jannah has only one way. Once the Prophet ﷺ is sent, all ways to Jannah has been blocked, except one way, which is the way of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And whoever is behind him, then they are on the right path. This is the Salat al-Mustaqim, which is Al-Islam, the deen of Al-Islam. Before distortions, because things get distorted, yes, to many people there are bid'ah, innovations, deviant sects, and many people would claim and attribute themselves to the deen of Al-Islam from a long time ago. But the Islam, the deen that was at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, the time of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, the Tabi'een, the Imma of this deen, this is what we need to adhere to. So a person needs to know the path, and that's the knowledge, that's the ilm of the deen of Al-Islam. And we always have to, again, to make sure that this ilm is qala Allah, qala Rasulu, qala Sahaba. These are principles. These are things that should never be challenged. And if a person has an issue with it, then he needs to go back and review what does it mean to say Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. So, and then after that, while now you know the path, you need to be safe till you reach your destination. This is wa'tasimu billah. This is where you need the help from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You might not be able to make it. There might be all kinds of robbers on the way. People might threaten you on the way. There's all kinds of makhawif, things that are fearful on the way. And this is how this life is. And there are many examples in the Quran that talks about this. And the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. Also, you're not left alone in a path that is very clear and all kinds of rest areas there and for you to enjoy. No, there are all kinds of fitan on both sides trying to take you away with all kinds of desires, sometimes threats, sometimes doubts, sometimes. So you also have to, part of knowing the path from a distance, that's one thing. But then once you're on it, you have to have the knowledge of how to keep yourself upon it, steadfast, firm upon it. And there are so many texts about this. And it's very sad that we get distracted by all kinds of things in our life and we don't learn these types of hadith and these types of verses of the Quran. And it has to be, we have to be taught these things over and over again. Not one time that we learned it 10 years ago. It has to be constantly. That we need to be reminded of it and how to be firm upon as-sirat al-mustaqim. What we say, ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim, every day, many times in Surah Al-Fatiha. So the reality of this path, how this path is the way it is, so that you don't get shocked or you get, that you didn't expect that the Salat al-Mustaqim is going to be like this. Everybody has their own wishful thinking of things, and it all depends on what upbringing, what a person learned, what is being bombarded, that he hears it and he sees it all the time. So this goes back to the wahy from Allah. So to learn this is the ilm, and this is the knowledge of the deen of Al-Islam. And to be safe while a person then going through these, where it seems to be difficult, but it's easy for those who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help. And if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala helps someone, if the entire world or whatever it contains, they try to oppose him, they won't be able to do anything to him. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is with him. That's why wa'tasimu billah. And there is no way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will order the people to do something and then their destruction and their misery will be as a result of them adhering to the commands of Allah. They don't go together. This is all in the minds of those who are ignorant about what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. So wa'tasimu billah, then submit yourself. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased for you to be upon this. Hold fast to the book of Allah and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and stay away from all of these distractions. So this is the second point. So the first one again is أن تعبدوه ولا تشركوا به شيئا. The second thing is وأن تعتصموا بحبل الله, that you hold fast to the rope of Allah. The third one وأن تناصحوا من والله الله أمركم, and tunasihu, to make the nasiha towards those who are, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made them in charge of you, to give them the nasiha. And giving them the nasiha is in the heart first. And then nasiha is the concern of how can you benefit the mansuh or the subject of the nasiha. So you have the concern towards them. How can they be upon what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from them? You make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for them. If you have the means to go advise them in the way that the Prophet ﷺ showed them, mashallah, this is great. Right? And not to cause means of evil and bloodshed and revolting and being against them. This is how the nusus and the text in the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ says this. And this is part of al-i'tisam billah, so that people are not dispersed in their affairs and they cause all kinds of evil things as a result of being in disputes with one another. So these are the three things briefly. أن تعبدوه ولا تشركوا به شيئا. And the second one, أن تعتصموا بحبل الله. And the third one, وأن تناصحوا من والله الله أمركم. And الدين النصيحة. And if you look at the word تناصحوا, this is the entire deen is about النصيحة. If a person doesn't have the nasiha in his heart, he should question the foundations of his religion. Why? Because they used to make the pledge of Islam to the Prophet ﷺ with a nasiha, meaning that they would say, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, Ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah, and then what is part of the bay'ah or the pledge to the Prophet ﷺ? Wa nasiha li kulli Muslim. To have the nasiha, the concern towards every Muslim. Every Muslim, whether it's a common Muslim, leader of the Muslim, whatever, to have the nasiha, the concern towards them, and each one according to their level and the way that a person would go about with what's in the heart, whether it's with speech and actions. So these are the three things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with you if you are upon them. The other three, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hate for you to be upon, and once a person hears that, he submits himself to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so he stay away from it. And when you see it, you would find that it's very easy to fall in it. And that means we have to make mujahada. We have to struggle with ourselves to be upon these, to stay away from these things. He said, alayhi salatu wassalam, that وَيَكْرَهُ لَكُمْ ثَلَاثًا يَكْرَهُ لَكُمْ الْقِيلِ وَالْقَالِ. The first one, قِيلَ وَقَالِ. What's قال? Let's start with the easy one. What's قال? قال, he says, right? قال in the past tense, he said. Qila, that's the passive tense. So qila means it was said. Qala, he said. So when they say he said, she said. Right? But this is qila wa qal. Qila wa qal, of course, it's more perfect, which refers to just narrating, conveying anything that you hear. Qila wa qal. It was said such and such. He said such and such. She said like this, not knowing what is being said, whether it's correct, whether it's wrong, doesn't matter. I'm just conveying, I'm just quoting someone. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hate for you to be like this, which is the norm that the person is frequent upon this. Qila wa qal. That the time is occupied with this. Qila wa qal. It's been said, they said, he said, like this. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said, كَفَى بِالْمَرْءِ كَذِبًا أن يحدث بكل ما سمع. It is sufficient for the person to be a liar if he speaks about everything that he hears. He hears anything and he says it. And he says it. He conveys anything that he hears. And this doesn't have to be literally and physically like this. I heard someone physically saying that to me, so I'm saying what he said. It can be nowadays, we see all types of fitan now, where you can share what anybody would send to you. And you would say, well, I received this, without knowing whether this is right or this is wrong. Doesn't have to be only deen. Deen is a very dangerous thing, of course, for someone to send and to circulate things that he doesn't know whether this is right or this is wrong. Just the fact that someone sends it does not mean that it's correct. And also matters of dunya matters, worldly matters. You know, people, they become in enmity with one another as a result of this. Oh, it was said that you're like this. He said that this, what happened in this place or that place. Stay away from this. Qila wa qal. And especially that it becomes on a daily and a habit thing for a person. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala yakrahu lakum thalathan. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hates for you to be like this. Life is precious, and to occupy our time with the first thing, the three things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with us to learn our deen, to have the akhlaq. And part of learning the deen is to learn the akhlaq and the manners to deal with one another and to apply this in our life. Just to make it not to make it too long, inshallah. So qila wa qal, and not to find excuses for ourselves. Because this is, we're commanded to submit ourselves. That means a person would stop immediately. And the only way that he would convey something is what? That if he, with certainty, that this is a good thing. So this is when it comes to the speech or conveying someone's speech or anything that we share or whatever there is. Al-asl, it's very important to learn in the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala what is the original ruling. Everything in the ibadah is haram. It is not permissible for you to make a ibadah from yourself unless it's proven otherwise. Meaning, you cannot add a rak'ah to Salatul Dhuhr. It's haram for you to make a fifth rak'ah in Salatul Dhuhr. It's haram for you to make a salah in a way that you like unless it's something that you learn from the wahy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Al-ibadah is not based on one's wishful thinking. You have to follow the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. So this is the asl, this is the foundation ruling of the ibadah. Versus mu'amalat, buying and selling, everything is halal unless proven otherwise. So this is one of the principles that makes it easier for a person to learn. If someone comes with a transaction, a very complex transaction in buying and selling, and then he asks, is this halal or haram, is it permissible? When someone says, bring the evidence that what you're doing is halal. No, bring the evidence that what I'm doing is haram. And the evidence is from the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. So what is the asl when it comes to speech, when it comes to conveying someone said that and so on? It's to be prevented, that we don't do it. That's the asl. Unless it's proven that this is a good thing, that a person has the knowledge that what he's about to convey is a good thing. And one of the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, when the people, there was the fitna at the time of the companions radiallahu anhum, and he said to them, ittahimul ra'i. He said to the people, accuse your opinions. And he says, لَقَدْ رَأَيْتُنِ يَوْمَ أَبِي جَنْدَلٍ. And he referred to the battle or to the sulh, the treaty of Al-Hudaybiyah. How it was a major test for the Sahaba radiallahu anhum when it comes to holding fast to the rope of Allah. And this is something maybe we can talk about it in details another time. But very briefly, you know the treaty of Al-Hudaybiyah, one of its conditions was that between the Prophet ﷺ and the people of Quraysh, he was going to make Umrah and the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, no fighting, nothing. They're going with their ihram. And the people of Quraysh, they prevented them. And they made the Sulh al-Hudaybiyah for them to return back and not to make the Umrah. So this is such a frustrating thing for the Sahaba radiallahu anhum. Plus, to add to this, is that whoever, one of them, because we're not going to go through all of it now, inshallah ta'ala, if one of the disbelievers, he become a Muslim, and he travels and he comes to the Prophet ﷺ making hijrah, that the Prophet ﷺ has to return him back to the kuffar. And the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, they were seeing these things being agreed. And this is wahy from Allah. But then what, Abi Jandal, one of the people that came while they were doing this, he came from Mecca as a believer, and his father was present. He said, this is the first thing that we apply, that the Prophet ﷺ have to hand him back to them, and Allah knows best what they're going to do with him. And this is where the Sahaba, if there was any position, as some of them said, that we would do whatever it takes. This is honor and dignity, and especially for the deen of Allah. But the only thing that they're supposed to do is to be obedient to Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu saying to Umar radiallahu anhu, ilzam gharzah, ilzam gharzah. Stay, how do you translate ilzam gharzah? Al-gharz is when you're stationed in a position. Stay in his position. And the concern was not for worldly and desires that they had, it's for the deen of Allah. And Umar radiallahu anhu would ask the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, ألسنا على الحق, aren't we upon the truth and they're upon the falsehood? لماذا نرضى الدنية في ديننا? Why would we accept الدنية? Why would we accept and be pleased with to be inferior when we have the upper hand? This is all opinions. And we have wahy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's why this is something that Umar radiallahu anhu kept on regretting till the end of his life that he just said these types of things. And of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is not even a sin. This is not something that, of course, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive them and pleased with them because this was the anger for the sake of Allah. But then they learned from it, اتهموا الرأي. Accuse your opinions. Don't think that your opinion is such a great opinion. If it's not wahy, that means be at ease with it. Don't hold very tight to it, and this is the haqq and the ultimate truth, and people would fight with each other over this. Is it wahy, revelation from Allah? If it's revelation from Allah, then we say sami'na wa ata'na, we listen and we obey, submission. If it's not, then take it easy on yourself. But anyway, especially when it comes to the ra'i in the religion. اتهموا الرأي, accuse your opinions when it comes to the religion, because we're supposed to follow the wahy from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So قيل وقال, and then, and with the details with it, وكثرة السؤال. The second one is وإضاعة المال. إضاعة المال, wasting money. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hate for you to waste your money. Your money, you earn it from halal, so you worked hard to make sure that it's from halal. There's a lot of struggle to make sure that it's from halal. If you don't care, then that's a different situation. But if you're a believer and you fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you would make sure that every penny comes from halal and you're certain about it. You're not in doubt. Doubt is not a good thing when it comes to earning. Doubt, you leave it away. But you're certain that this is halal. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the provider. And also you have another struggle to make sure that you spend it in what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with. And wasting money on sins, for example, which is haram, or waste, excessiveness in things, is of no benefit whatsoever. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hate for you to be upon this. And this is a detailed subject, of course. وَإِضَاعَةُ الْمَالِ. And the subject of al-mal and wealth is a huge subject in the deen of Allah. We need to know the ahkam of it, the rulings of it, and how to deal with it. And the third one, وَكَثْرَةُ السُّؤَالِ, which is related to also al-i'tisam bil-kitabi wa sunnah, to hold fast and adhere to the Quran and the Sunnah. كَثْرَةُ السُّؤَالِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hates for you to ask too many questions. And that, in brief, what it means, at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, they were forbidden from asking too many questions because the wahy is coming. So that the wahy does not bring something that they asked for, and it becomes obligatory upon them when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted the ease for them. So they were commanded not to ask for things that did not get revealed yet. This is one meaning of it. And of course, once the wahy is finished, which is the case, then it's okay in that case for a person to ask. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. So you have to ask about your religion. And the wahy is not going to change, so it's okay to ask. So from that perspective. The second one, which is still valid at their time and in our times and at all times, كَثْرَةُ السُّؤَالِ, where there's no benefit. Too many questions that are made up questions. Questions that would take the person from adhering to the Quran and the Sunnah. And this is a very important meaning. Right? A person asked, for example, what is the ruling of shurb al-khamr? Is it halal or haram to drink wine? The answer to it, it's haram. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, that the khamr is forbidden on you, and the hadith very clear like this, right? Or someone works serving, the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ is very clear. Or someone sells something haram, and the hadith in Sahih Muslim, and it's a consensus, إِذَا حَرَّمَ اللَّهُ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ شَيْئًا حَرَّمَ ثَمَنَهُ. If Allah forbade something, He forbade the money that comes from it. حَرَّمَ بَيْعَهُ. He forbade it selling it. So this is the ruling, wahy from Allah, it's very clear. Then a person asks questions. What is the question for? If he's trying to learn more to basically fulfill the commands of Allah, mashallah, this is great. But to ask questions to change the rulings, because where else are you going to go after the wahy has been made clear? But my situation and this situation, yes, his situation might be in a matter of necessity, and a person of knowledge would rule this matter. But whether it's to deviate away from adhering to the Quran and the Sunnah, whether it's kathratu su'al, the lots of questioning that for some things that did not happen yet, just to be famous, or to corner someone, or to look like you know things. So things are of no benefit. وَكَثْرَةُ السُّؤَالِ. So these are the three things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hates, and it has details to it also, and that is related to holding fast to the Quran and the Sunnah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with you with three things. أن تعبدوه ولا تشركوا به شيئا. And the second one, وأن تعتصموا بحبل الله. And the third one, أن تناصحوا من والله الله أمركم. And he hates for you three things. قيل وقال وإضاعة المال, wasting money, وكثرة السؤال. One last thing before we end inshallah. Imam al-Bukhari rahimahullah, he has the chapter before last in his book. Sahih al-Bukhari, the most authentic book after the Quran. The last chapter is Kitab al-Tawheed, the last one. The first chapter is called Bid'ul Wahy, the beginning of the Wahy. And as the ulama, they say, if you want to learn the tarajim with the titles of the books of Imam al-Bukhari and the subtitles, lots of ilm in it. Just the fact, and he's one of the people, one of the ulama, mashallah, that he would make so much knowledge in his titles of the chapters for people to think and to see the relationship between the title and the hadith that he would include in the chapters. So it started with Bid'ul Wahy, how the Wahy started, which is the first thing, of course, that a person know about the deen of Islam, the Wahy, the importance of the Wahy, the revelation from Allah. Never to treat the Wahy like human beings saying things. This is revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the last thing is the Tawheed. The first thing that you start with is the Wahy, and the last thing that you would need to depart from this life is a Tawheed. So that your life is according to the Wahy and the Tawheed at the end. This is how a person is saved. Before the Kitab al-Tawheed, which is the last chapter, Kitab al-I'tisami bil-Kitabi was-Sunnah. He made it the one before last, after all of the different chapters and all subjects of the deen. To hold fast, to adhere to the Quran and the Sunnah. And if you look at the chapters, the titles of it, just 2 minutes inshallah, you would find, and the hadith of course are amazing in the subject, right? But it's about al-iqtida' bi af'al al-Nabi sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. First of all, a hadith in al-i'tisam, adhering into the book, to the Quran and the Sunnah. Following the actions of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. إثم من آوى محدثا, and al-muhdith, the one that opposes the deen of Allah. What the Prophet عليه الصلاة ما كان النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يسأل مما لم ينزل عليه الوحي. The Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام himself, when he's asked about something and the wahy did not come down yet about the subject, he would not answer عليه الصلاة والسلام. And he's the messenger of Allah. When they asked the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام about al-ruh, the soul or the spirit, he did not answer till the wahy came. يسألونك عن الروح. They asked the Prophet ﷺ about inheritance. He, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if there's anyone on the face of earth that has the right to answer anything, it's the Prophet ﷺ. But he would not say anything till the wahy comes to the Prophet ﷺ. And you see how this is what it means to adhere. This is one of the rulings of adhering to the Quran and the Sunnah, that you don't say unless it's known that this is the Quran and the Sunnah. قول النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم لا تزال طائفة من أمتي ظاهرين على الحق وهم أهل العلم. The statement of the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام, there is always going to be a group of my ummah upon the truth, and that the people of knowledge, adhering to the Quran and the Sunnah. And then some of the ahkam, some of the rulings that is very specific even to the people of knowledge. من شبه أصلا معلوما بأصل مبين قد بين الله حكمهما ليفهم السائر. Which is one of the ways to extract rulings with something that is not directly mentioned in the Quran and the Sunnah, like analogy, but here for the purpose of the person to understand. And there's a hadith that gives the subject of knowledge. لَتَتَّبِعُنَّ سَنَنَ مَنْ كَانَ قَبْلَكُمْ. The chapter the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, that you would follow the ways of those who before you. What those who before you did to their books, they did not adhere to it. ذكر النبي صلى الله عليه ما ذكر النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم وحض على اتفاق أهل العلم. What the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام mentioned and encouraged people to for the people of knowledge to be upon the ilm and the knowledge, to be united upon it. باب قوله تعالى وكان الإنسان أكثر شيء جدلا. The chapter titled, part of the verse, and the human being is the most thing in argumentative. How human beings are argumentative. How is that related to al-i'tisam? Because al-i'tisam, to adhere to the Quran and the Sunnah, that means what? Don't be argumentative with the wahy from Allah. Argue in all kinds of other things, but not with the wahy. Don't argue with the wahy. And that's why if you know the wahy, what's you going to argue about? So how Imam Bukhari rahimahullah, and there's a hadith under, this is on just reading the title of the chapters. So there's work to be done, of course, to learn this. And then إذا اجتهد العامل أو الحاكم فأخطأ. If the ruler, if the عامل, meaning the one that the ruler sent to rule, if the عالم make ijtihad and he made a mistake, because al-ijtihad is not for anyone to do. The alim that reach a level of knowledge where he's making ijtihad about a matter that doesn't have nas, doesn't have text. A ruler, for example, he has to make a ruling in a situation that there's no evidence to it, or maybe he doesn't know the evidence, but he has to make a ruling or a decision right now. What if he makes a mistake? He's rewarded because he is someone that fits that position. But as he mentioned in the book, which is part of the title, that is not to be followed in his mistake. And why? Because you need to adhere to the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. He's rewarded. If he made ijtihad and he made a mistake, he's rewarded. But it is not permissible to follow him when he's upon the mistake, and the way to do that. الحجة على من قال إن أحكام النبي كانت ظاهرة. الأحكام اللي تعرف بالدلائل. Some of the rulings to be known with evidences. The Prophet ﷺ said, لا تسألوا أهل الكتاب عن شيء. Do not ask the people of the book about anything. You have enough. You have sufficiency in the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. كراهية الخلاف. The chapter of the dislike and the hate of al-khilaf, to be in dispute. Why there is dispute? If we're commanded to adhere to the Quran and the Sunnah. If there's a dispute, meaning in a negative way, that means people, they have a problem with adhering with the Quran and the Sunnah. Someone would say, but the Imam of the Deen, they had differences of opinions. This is not the evil ikhtilaf. They were all honoring one another. And look at the statements of the Imam al-Arba'a, the four Imams, when they said about one another. They did not fight with each other. They did not boycott one another. Right? Because their goal and their ways, and this is the ways of the people of knowledge, was to follow the Prophet ﷺ. Different than al-khilaf, that will cause people to hate each other, to boycott one another, that is unjustified. نهي النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم على التحريم, to adhere to the Quran and the Sunnah. This is the asl. Anything that the Prophet ﷺ forbade, that means it's haram, unless there's another statement from the Prophet ﷺ that takes it from being haram to be disliked, or, which is a huge subject, but it requires ilm, and this is for the people of knowledge, not for the common people like us. For example, dalalatu siyaq, the way that the context is, not just a siyaq of what's written, is what the Prophet ﷺ looked and acted upon something that the Sahaba understood. You understand that? Like, for example, I might say something now, if you write it down, you would understand from it something. But my gestures, when I'm speaking, when you're looking at me, would mean something different, right? And one of the hadith, and I'm sorry I'm taking too much, few minutes inshallah. A woman came, and there's no shyness in the religion. A woman came to the Prophet ﷺ, and she asked how to clean herself after the monthly cycle. So the Prophet ﷺ and Aisha radiallahu anha is present, and she's narrating this. So the Prophet ﷺ, he said, tawadda'i bifirsa. Tawadda'i, with a piece of cotton. Tawadda'i means, when I say tawadda'i, what do you understand for tawadda'i? Wudu? Make wudu? No. Tawadda'i here linguistically. Prophet ﷺ is saying linguistically, that means clean yourself. With cotton, right? But he said it tawadda'i, like this. So the woman said, how can I do that to Prophet of Allah? The Prophet ﷺ doesn't want to be explicit. He said, tawadda'i bifirsa. That means clean yourself with a cotton like this. He said it 3 times. And every time he says, how can I do that to Prophet of Allah? Aisha radiallahu anha, she said, I recognized what the Prophet ﷺ wants to say. So how did she recognize this? By being present. You know, if this is something that has been taken like this and it's been saved like this, people will have all kinds of understanding of what that means. So she said, I grabbed her and I told her, I whispered to her how to clean herself, right? The details of doing so, right? So how Aisha radiallahu anha took that from the way the Prophet ﷺ was saying. So that's why the understanding of the Sahaba, and there's so many examples, and for the understanding of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, how the Prophet ﷺ said what he said. This is an essential thing. This is an obligation upon us to understand this deen the way the Sahaba understood it, because they were witnessing the ayat coming down. witnessing the explanations of it, witnessing the Prophet ﷺ saying the hadith, acting upon it, and they would understand from it beyond what is only written, right? So also many dalalat or many ways to understand, and this is all, and he would mention this. And then قول الله تعالى وأمرهم شورى بينهم. The last one was وأمرهم شورى بينهم. That the shura and having mashura and consultation, this is how the believers are. This is in the chapter of Al-i'tisam bil-kitabi wa sunnah. Yes, if the matter is not clear, and of course among the people of knowledge and things like this. So just to have an idea that the matter is, of course, with ilm, but the common Muslim, each and every one of us, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees in our hearts is that we need to hold fast to the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, full submission. Once the matter becomes clear to us, and this is with ilm, then a person have nothing but the submission to Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, and to respect the matter that it's based on knowledge, so there are ahkam to be taught and for people to be patiently learning this. I'm sorry I took too much of your time. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us hold fast to the deen of Allah and to make us truly follow the way of the Prophet ﷺ. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. And I guess everything is ready. But if there is anything that is quick or we don't have time. Any questions that are true or false questions? There was a brother, mashallah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect him. He would always ask me true or false questions. That was the easiest thing. True or false? And then he gives the question. True. Jazakumullah khairan. False. If I don't know, Allahu a'lam. Multiple choice. Any questions? طيب بارك الله. تفضل. He's putting on your spot, inshallah. طيب بارك الله فيكم. سبحانك اللهم ربنا وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.